Hello and welcome to this presentation. This is called an Expert Insight webinar. Tonight's presentation is on how AI is changing the professional landscape of writing, editing, and publishing. My name is Stacy Fonts. I'm a program director here at UW Continuum College. At Continuum College, we believe education should be accessible, relevant, and available to learners at every stage of their personal and professional journeys. As part of the University of Washington, we expand access to high-quality learning opportunities that helps people build skills, pursue new goals, and make meaningful impacts in their communities and careers. Our Expert Insight webinar series reflects that commitment by connecting learners with thought leaders, emerging ideas, and practical expertise, meeting them where they are and supporting them in wherever they want to go next. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge my panelists here tonight. I'm joined by Matthew Bennett, Ingrid Emmerich, and David Herning. The insights you'll be learning are grounded in their experiences as professionals. As with any rapidly evolving topic, the perspectives shared today are intended to inform and spark discussion rather than provide definitive answers or legal guidance. At UW Continuum College, we're committed to helping learners navigate emerging trends and technologies. AI is reshaping many professions, including editing and writing, and part of our role is to create opportunities for thoughtful exploration of what that means in practice. Let's begin by meeting our panelists. First, I have Matthew Bennett, founder of Breakwater Editorial and instructor for UW Professional and Continuing Education's AI Essentials and Writers and Editors course, specialization in developmental editing, and in the certificate in editing. Next, we have Ingrid Emmerich, co-founder and president of Girl Friday Productions and instructor in the UW Certificate in Editing program as well. And David Herning, technical writer and editor at Microsoft, who has also been a longstanding contributor to the Certificate in Editing, as well as content strategy and storytelling. Artificial intelligence is reshaping how we create, edit, and share content across nearly every industry. As these tools become increasingly integrated into professional workflows, they're creating exciting opportunities for efficiency and innovation while also raising important questions about quality, authenticity, and the role of human expertise. What we're learning is that the future of writing and editing isn't about replacing people with AI. Instead, it's about understanding how to use these tools thoughtfully while preserving the judgment, creativity, critical thinking, and human connection that make a communication effective and meaningful. That's what we're exploring today. We'll start by grounding the conversation in the broader context of AI and its impact on the profession. Then we'll hear from each of our panelists about how writing, editing, and publishing, as well as technical communications, are evolving in the age of AI. From there, we'll explore emerging policies, opportunities, challenges, and what the future may hold before taking questions. To help set the stage, I'd like to start by introducing our first speaker, Matthew Bennett. Matt will begin by providing some context for our discussion, including the rapid emergence of generative AI, the scope of its influence, and some of the key moments that have shaped the conversation around AI and content creation.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Matt. I'm here to introduce the context for this talk. I'm gonna be presenting some figures here. I'm sure that many of you were probably first introduced to AI, as we're calling it, which is what we're really referring to are large language models by and large. But the major AI was launched publicly in 2022, at the end of 2022. That was ChatGPT. And at that point, the use of AI went from zero users, essentially, to 100 million in approximately 2 months. So that was the fastest product launch of any internet product in history. Very rapidly taken on. Since then, the industry has grown and adoption has increased. I confess that I was maybe one of the late adopters, in as much as that I was reluctant to dive in at first. I did play around with it, but not in a professional capacity. Well, from those 100 million users, we are now looking at something like 1 billion users of AI in approximately 3.5 years. That is a massive change in people's use of technology. So from nothing, the essential market value of AI in 2022 was zero, and that has rapidly grown with a lot of corporate and government investments, not just here in the United States, but abroad as well. Within the US, the current estimated market is around 140 to 180 billion, with global corporate investment at around 540 billion. So a lot of companies are confident in AI products as a way to create efficiencies and lower prices for operations, essentially. Now, we're thinking of this as writers, editors, and publishers here. So we want to think about this and how it relates to certain primary markets. Both Ingrid and I work in book editing and publishing. So I am we are primarily concerned with how this affects book publishing within the US. So for an apples to apples comparison, we have United States publishers are generating about $33 billion dollars in revenue per year with about 4% growth last year. In comparison, only two of the major AI companies, these are OpenAI and Anthropic, have generated somewhere around $50 billion dollars in revenue in 2026. And their revenue growth is somewhere between 120 and 800% growth. So orders of magnitude higher in their growth of revenue. Okay, behind every great fortune is a great crime, so they say, and that's the truth with AI. These large language models were trained on books without that were under copyright protection, largely without permission. I believe Books 3 was one of the major cache of digitized books that was used by a lot of these companies. And because of that, because the books were under copyright protection, they have been taken to court by publishers and by groups of authors. Now, a lot of these cases are slowly working their way through the courts. Um, and so there's still an open question on what any kind of payoff will be for publishers. But a recent case was settled with Anthropic, resulting in a 1.5 billion settlement agreement where the authors were to receive something around $3,000 each. Now, that was in addition to whatever royalties that they had already received for their books, and was to essentially allow Anthropic to proceed with its product. And its product in this case would be Claude, my personal favorite among the AIs. We have also seen some scandals arising in the literary communities. This has created some tremors in the literary market as some writers are accused of using AI, or the publishers are being swamped with AI generated books. So we have the increase in books published. Traditional book publishing has gone up about 6.6. These figures are for 2025. But you can see in the self-published area that there is nearly a 40% jump in the number of self-published books. And this does, for me, indicate that the some of those self-published books are being facilitated or potentially entirely written by AI. As well, a number of high-profile book deals have been canceled. Um, in one case, the book Shy Girl was canceled by Hachette, and another by Minotaur as well. And there is a lot of scrutiny for the Commonwealth Prize of Literature that resulted in the literary journal Granta breaking ties with the literary prize because of suspicions that the writers were using AI. Finally, and I wish I could slow down to give you a lot of images of these. Essentially, any high-profile writer who publishes a book, like a memoir, they will see within the next week that another unofficial biography is being published about them. And so this happens a lot, especially with writers who are anticipated to generate a lot of sales. So you will see that whoever is publishing these, they're using AI, they're scraping the internet for details, and they're generating these books that have very little in value, in my opinion. But they are an attempt to catch readers who are unaware that this is not an official biography and is largely hands off, no humans involved, so to speak. And finally, okay, so we're going to transition after this into our own experiences of how AI has influenced our remit. David's going to talk about how it has affected his work as a writer, especially as a technical writer. Ingrid will talk about her work as a publisher, and I will also talk about my work as an editor. And there are AI products that are essentially catering to these sort of three major steps in the process of generating a published manuscript, whether that's a book or an article. So you will see under writing, we have the Pseudo-Write, Novel Crafter, Jasper, and the like. Editing, ProWriting Aid, Grammarly is probably familiar to many of you. And in publishing, Atticus, Vellum, Publisher Rocket, and Canva. Now, some of these are standalone products, AI products. Others are word processing or editing products that have incorporated AI into them. So you will see, for example, I could include in this list Microsoft Word because Microsoft Word allows you to add on either Copilot or Claude at this point. So you can use as well Grammarly has an AI function within it, even though it's not strictly an AI product. I'm going to now pass it along to my colleagues here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining tonight. When I first was asked to be on this panel, I was like, oh no, I can't be the curmudgeon on the panel. But we had great conversations, and my thinking remain skeptical, and yet at the same time has evolved a bit. And I think everyone on the panel, we all were really kind of a meeting of minds when we talked about the challenges, the opportunities, the things that are very worrying about AI, but also the things that provide great possibility. So it is a fascinating topic. We can say that about it, right? Okay, so I mean, first off, I think like many folks who've like delved into this at all, I mean, from a personal perspective I'm deeply troubled by the way that these large language models were trained as Matt talked about. I'm also, I think the speed at which these companies are acquiring wealth and consolidating should freak us all out, as Hank Green said in his like piece on Reddit. I agree with him on that. And I also agree that I'm worried about the climate impacts of AI. I mean, so I think that those things are just, as a human being, something I think we should all be wrestling with and trying to figure out ways in which those can be mitigated. So the lawsuit being one of them with OpenAI. So, okay, so let me talk a bit about publishing. It's been really interesting. I'll speak for the entire publishing industry, but I'll say that, like, publishers were understandably freaked out by AI when it came on the scene, because I think really to us, we were very concerned about well, first of all, the large language models being trained on books without any kind of remuneration for writers. There was also what we knew would happen, which is a whole lot of garbage books pushed out through through Amazon and other digital platforms, despite Amazon and other digital platforms' best efforts to stop that. It's very difficult. So those things have they've come to fruition. Of course, plagiarism, like the kind of concepts around plagiarism are big. And, we're seeing that with authors who come to us and have used AI as an assistant and working on their projects. So we worry about sort of how much they've used AI. It puts us in an uncomfortable position, as we don't want to start a relationship with an author in a sort of where we're interrogating them or hectoring at them for their use. So as publishers, we've all really grappled with how we can formulate a realistic policy that we all feel good about, that also is one that is flexible and open to change, but yet holds a certain line that I think as publishers we'd like to hold as a group. So, and at the same time, like really approaching it in a way that we know writers, many don't want to be using it in a way that would detract from literature, would detract from their own work, would put other writers out of business. So, we're not in an adversarial relationship with writers, but we definitely are in a situation that is a little more like, it's kind of like the plagiarism conversation you have to have sometimes, like on steroids right now, because a lot of folks who come to us with their manuscripts, I don't think realize kind of how I'm not sure they're quite as well informed about their use of AI and sort of what those lines are. That's what we're seeing, at least. Some are very informed, others are not so informed. So it's up to us to kind of dig in a little and find out. Okay, so in terms of, I would say for me, we've formulated our policies based on the Authors Guild, who has excellent policies, I think, on AI. What we will say is that this is here to stay. It is only going to grow. It's part of the publishing and writing landscape. It's rapidly changing so quickly that AI detecting software can't catch up with AI generated text. We know that. So really, it's back to the old standard of like trust and communication and transparency. So that's kind of how we're approaching our conversations with authors. We're asking them, did you use AI at all in the writing of your book, whether it's as a research assistant, a brainstorming partner, formatting, whatever it might be, or did you use it to generate your text or parts of your text? We just need to know. And, a lot of publishers in the beginning, I say this is probably like 1 year ago, maybe when they all started having policies come out, would say, we're not going to publish anything that has any AI assisted or AI generated. Definitely, and that's all changed already because everyone realizes it's that genie's out of the bottle. So what we've decided, at least for the time being, is that as long as we can have an honest and open conversation with our authors about how they did use it, we can work backwards from there. So let's say that they used it as an assistant in research and, for brainstorming, all of that, fine. We probably would, depending on the type of text it is, require a fact check. So we're going to hire a human fact checker to fact check that, knowing that AI was primarily their research tool. Second, if we know that they use parts of it for writing or all of it for writing, because I'm telling you, we're getting so many submissions all of a sudden. And I'm thinking a lot of this has to do with people being able to write a book in a weekend because they're using AI to do it. So we're getting a lot. At first we thought, wow, something's going on with our SEO. And then we realized what was kind of happening. So if people are using it for that, what we have built in is like, okay, we're going to treat this like a translation where we will require a heavy developmental line edit by a human being so that we can essentially humanize and make that, AI generated text and make sure that it has a consistent voice, one that the author feels very comfortable with, and obviously one that is original. So we're essentially doing what we call a collaborative edit, what some might even think of as slightly a bit of a ghostwrite, but essentially the AI was used as a ghostwriter. So now we're coming in as a collaborative editor and really getting our hands in there and making sure that we've humanized it. And for all you editors out there, I think this is going to be a lot of the future for the work that you do, especially as developmental and line editors, is that I think you're going to be doing a lot of work in this way, which isn't necessarily bad news, I would say, compared to some industries where I'd have a grimmer view of what the future looks like. I actually think there's going to be a lot of opportunity on that front.
So let's see what I can do. So yeah, my background is it's not necessarily technical as much, although I'm doing technical writing now, but I have worked at both tech companies and universities for my entire career, about 20 years at Microsoft. And a lot of that has been content writing and editing, but now I'm doing more technical writing and editing. And, as someone who's been in this industry for 33 years, obviously the last year to 2 years has been really fascinating because when I actually started on this blog that I'm currently on, we didn't trust AI to write. And so, or we would have it write something and it wouldn't be very good. And that was 2 years ago, let's say, and we were like worried about hallucinations. So we were like writing it old school in a way that we were just drafting it ourselves. Now we've been given the dictate at Microsoft of we don't have time for that. We need you guys to have Copilot draft your article, and they're technical content. So, and we're writing about Copilot and other agents in many cases. So it's obviously like we need to use our own technology that we're promoting. So we're being told, hey, budgets are cut. We need you to use Copilot to draft the article. Now, you don't just do that and turn it in, then you go through it and make sure that everything makes sense and fix all the issues. And a lot of the issues are it's very formulaic. And so you need to make sure it doesn't sound like AI wrote it, even though AI wrote much of it. But you might be putting a lead onto it. You're adding the creative human touch. The other thing that we're doing and as writers is we are still interviewing the subject matter experts, right? And so our job is you can have AI write the questions for you, but you are actually meeting to talk to that person, get the best quotes. You can ask AI to help you figure out, hey, what are the best quotes from this interview transcript? But you're going to look at it and you're going to be like, no, that's not a good quote. This is the relevant quote. So it is a lot more editing than writing. And I would just say that yes, what Ingrid was saying about, yes, there's going to be opportunities for word people, but it may not be as much pure writing. It may be a lot more synthesizing. You are going to be using these tools, and obviously Microsoft is on the bleeding edge of this, and so they're going to be pushing AI more heavily than maybe a non-technical company would, but I think all companies are looking to save money and they're looking at as they want to justify the money they're spending on these AI tools. And so one way to do that is to say, hey, we can produce more content with less people or less time, and we don't need to hire as many freelance writers, but we do need editors on staff to then look at the writing that's being turned in. And by the way, I'm both a writer and editor on our technical blog. So I get to write and use AI in my writing, but I also get to look at people's writing and go, okay, this is too much AI. It's too, like, we're being told we don't want to publish AI slop. If the reader detects it, they're going to downgrade it. They're going to be like, okay, I could get this from Claude myself. Like, what are we bringing as value as human editors? Well, discernment, like we said, talking to the subject matter experts. We are promoting those subject matter experts on our blog, which is one reason why we exist. So making sure that we get the photo of them, we get the good quote, we run it by them and make sure that they sign off on it. There's a lot of back and forth in that regard as an editor But again, we're being told use AI, but don't look like you're using AI. So it's a really tricky spot that we're in right now. And it's like it's changing all the time. It's different now than it was 3 months ago and 3 months before that. So that's where we are today. And if you came to a talk on this in a year, it would probably be different. So that's kind of where we're trying to hit a moving target in some ways. So that's all I got for now.
Thanks, David. Yeah, the question of style you both touched on is one that is, I think, going to be um, an unsolvable issue. We can recognize, a lot of people can recognize AI writing. It has certain habits in it. It uses certain punctuation that folks recognize. It also combines both the sort of material and the abstract in ways that are on the surface sort of poetic, but at the same time meaningless. In a way that you can tell that the language was not generated by a mind that is existing in a body, so to speak. Um, and in my own work, I was very reluctant to pick it up. I was aware of early scandals in this, such as companies generating fake writers, sort of AI writers. So they were generating profiles for these writers. They included even AI generated photos for them. And we're using them to publish articles that included obvious AI tells in them. This was, for example, an early issue with the Sports Illustrated and their the owner company, a conglomerate whose name I can't remember, where the CEO essentially had to step down. And now people are very, in a sense, and I think rightly so, protective of the human role in writing and in art, in culture, and the like. Now, as an editor, I'm sort of somewhere in that ecosystem, right? So I am both seeing potentially AI generated products out there, as well as receiving writers who may have used AI in their creative process. And because of that, early on, I created my own AI policy. But like Ingrid, I suddenly realized, I soon realized that I would have to adapt that policy, and essentially change it year over year as some of the issues are resolved, and as it becomes more a commonplace part of the writing process. So one of the really big issues early on was the question of the author's privacy. Now, as an editor, when an author gives me their manuscript, it is my responsibility as an editor to protect the privacy of that manuscript and to say to the author, I'm not gonna sell this to someone else. I'm not gonna share it with someone else. I'm not gonna talk about your manuscript with other people and reveal what the contents are. Because privacy is a very important issue for both writers and editors. Well, with the early versions of AI, they essentially, ChatGPT made the use of ChatGPT public. OpenAI made the use of ChatGPT free for the public because they needed more training data, right? So anything that you would put into the earliest version of these AI models would be used as training data. Well, that resulted in the sharing of corporate secrets, proprietary information, and the like. Now, as an editor, I can't do that. I couldn't, in good conscience, share the hopes, dreams, and artistic aspirations of the writers that I was working with. So I refused to use it in my work until suddenly the AI companies decide, well, we're going to create a certain class of our AI models that provide a guarantee to the user that the information that is being put into the model will not be used as training data. That resolved one of the major ethical concerns that I had with its use. Now, the other one is for me transparency. So I am clear up front with my editing process with my writers. And if I am going to use AI in any part of the edit, I will have to get some kind of okay from the writers that I work with. And if they say, no, I don't want you to use AI on it, I have to respect that. Now, one of the interesting cases is um, that I lost the thread of my thought there. Um, but I've come around to its use. That's where I was going. Because of the guarantees in privacy, I have slowly begun adopting it in my editing process. And so there are certain functions that it's actually quite good at. And one of the breakthrough functions for me is the fact that you can use AI to search a manuscript for ideas. And that was never possible before this. If you were going to use a word processor, you could search for a specific word. You could also search, for a specific capitalization of a word, for example, but you couldn't search for an idea. Now that you can, and as long as the writer agrees to it, I can use AI, for example, to provide me a list of the settings in a manuscript. Now, that can be a very laborious process as a developmental editor. I'm going through a manuscript trying to list all the settings that are included in the story. If I can essentially give a command to AI to give me a list of the settings within this novel, for example, that can save me per book something around 1 or 2 full days of labor. And that is a major breakthrough. And while my use of it is still limited, I primarily use it for research. I do occasionally use it when I'm composing editorial notes because it is able to extract information and list it for me in a way that would have been very laborious in the past. But that is also not intrusive into any of the major concerns. It's not affecting my taste. It's not affecting my judgment. It has nothing to do with the creative capacities that I bring to a manuscript. But it does allow for the automation of certain really laborious tasks that before took a lot of time. Stacy, should we move on to the major topics? No?
Yeah, so if I can kick us off, this will kind of be a conversation amongst our three panelists. For our first topic, and to note for our guests that are watching this presentation, we will come back to the questions that you were putting in the chat. So thank you for, sorry, the Q&A panel. So thank you for doing so. We see them there. We will get to them. For our first topic, we have how writing, editing, and publishing have changed since ChatGPT.
I'll let the other two jump in since I just gave my spiel.
I kind of answered that in my intro, so I'll just say again, like, a lot of publishers have been putting up AI policies and kind of reading each other's and kind of doing similar type policies. We're all trying to, figure out what is reasonable and what is flexible. And like I said, I think the key is around transparency, around creating more of an conversation with our authors, and one where we're educating each other about the best way to use AI. It is a very powerful tool. We all know that. So how can we use it in a way that is ethical and in a way that won't impinge on potential copyright issues, which, AI generated text technically can't be copywritten, which means that if it can't be copywritten, it can't be distributed, and so therefore really not sold. So there's a lot of things that we have to, in that regard, that we need to talk with our authors about. And I didn't touch on this before, but I'll touch on it very quickly because it's in response to this is we're also as publishers seeing the visual issues coming up around cover designs. And so not just words, but people coming to us, writers coming to us with their AI design covers and wanting us to use those. And as a publisher, working together collaboratively with an author to create a cover that we're very excited about and they're very excited about and is professional and done by a human designer is really important to us. And so that has been an area where we hold the line on that and have said, like, you're welcome to show us what you've come up with, but this will treat as a mood board. It's something we'll get some ideas from. It'll help our designer see kind of what your vision. And so we really treat it as like mood board or like comp title, covers. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at right now.
I will just say that in tech, it's the Wild West, like, as you know, it's the industry that AI is coming out of, and we haven't been very good in this country about having regulations and policies. So we don't have much in the way of guidelines. I would say that we are encouraged to use these products. Microsoft is customer zero, meaning we use all our own technology. In fact, that's what the blog is about. So of course, we're going to be using everything and using new agents all the time. There really aren't a lot of things that they say don't use it. Again, it's just this balance of, you know what, you can use it as much as you want, but if it looks like it's AI slop, we're going to push back on it as editors or as the managers of the blog. So, but I'll let Matt talk about policies because that's all I got.
Yeah, no, my own policy has evolved. I was very much anti-AI early on, and I would still, as personal preference, want to work with writers who are sort of speaking from the heart, writing their own manuscripts rather than automating the process. So, on the one hand, my AI policy is a little more open now. But on the other hand, I still choose projects that have me working with writers who have, say, spent 10 years writing their memoir, something like that. This, for me, part of the joy of editing in the first place is actually having a creative connection with someone and doing a collaborative project. So there's less of that when it comes to someone who is automating the writing process. So even though my AI policy is a little more ample, my preference is still for the writers who have, say, poured their heart and soul into a manuscript. Um, to respond to one of the writers or one of the questions about the convergence of AI writing style and human style, because we do want to talk about style here. I would say yes, I think that's kind of an inevitability, especially as these AI companies are training the models on deeper, even historical writing in any language, right? They keep on finding more books to scan, and the internet itself is alive with AI training. So anyone who is using, for example, the web form Reddit, your whatever you're posting online is being used as training data. So yes, there will be some convergence as AI becomes better at arriving at a human voice. At the same time, if I have to put on my sort of seeing into the future, looking into the crystal ball, I do believe for literary style, there will be a trend towards what we might call a more human style. I don't know what that's going to be, but I believe it'll be a reaction against this kind of the flatness and whatever tone is involved in AI writing.
Thank you all for those insights. Moving on to our next topic. You've touched on both opportunities and challenges, but just another opportunity, for lack of a better word at the moment, to go further on what you're seeing that's new and out there.
A couple things come to mind. I spoke a little bit about the opportunity for editors, line editors, developmental editors, of doing that kind of. I think there's going to be a lot of work in humanizing AI generated content in the future, or now and in the future. I think the same is true, honestly, for fact checkers and folks that work in that realm. I think there is probably some potential risk for proofreading and copy editing to some degree, proofreading more than copy editing. Well, I haven't seen that play out yet with publishers. Publishers are still everyone I've talked to and what I've seen is very committed to working with humans for all editorial. there certainly will be the ability to, maybe help make your style sheets faster and maybe help create your dev editing memos from your margin comments and things like that, that are just kind of very robust macros in a lot of ways, and very robust. So there's some good opportunities there. I would say that one of the big challenges for publishers, and this is also thus a challenge for authors, is there's not more readers coming around, right? There's less and less readers because more and more people, our free time is like, diluted with all of our entertainment options that we have. But there's a lot more books being published, as Matt's slide showed, every day. 11,000, I think, a day is the number that in the US, which is just a shocking number. So lots of people writing, not more people reading. And so discoverability continues to be the number one issue for authors and thus for publishers, as how do you make your book stand out? Well, that's only going to get harder when you have people who can write a book in a weekend. So, which is, again, happening already. So that's a big challenge, I think, as we go forward.
Yeah, I think maybe Ingrid and I have experienced this, the question of trust when it comes to the writer, editor, or writer publisher experience. I really do feel that the kind of filter that is going to evolve culturally will be one of sort of human relationships, right? So if I know the writer personally and I can trust them, then I could believe in their writing. And I think that's going to continue to be a development because the challenge of all these books, 11,000 a day, that's far too many books for anyone to really get a grasp of the literary landscape. You'd be lucky to read 11,000 books in a lifetime. So with all these books out there, the question is, how do you separate a genuine artistic development? Say, if you're reading something like literary fiction or genre fiction, or an authentic life, if you're reading something like a memoir or some kind of creative nonfiction. And I believe there's going to be a push for more material culture. So a sense of, in my own experience, um, taking on projects because I know the writer, or taking on a book to publish because I know them personally, rather than being swamped by projects that have potentially no name or face attached to them and have not involved the kind of blood, sweat, and tears that typically go into the writing of a novel. So I think there are some opportunities in the way of distinguishing some kind of organic writing projects from the ocean, the tidal wave of AI generated books coming out.
Thank you. Again, we've touched on this a little bit, especially talking about challenges between AI writing style versus human writing style. Before we jump ahead to our final bullet point there, I just wanted to give the panelist an opportunity if you had something else you wanted to add in regard to AI writing style versus the human.
I guess I would like to say that, if you're going to be an editor now, in any context, you need to know what AI writing looks like. So you'll find various sources out there. You can ask AI to tell you what is AI about this piece of writing. But I'm reading articles about the fact that AI loves to say, it's not this, it's that. And why does it say that? And I'm seeing that construction all the time. So it's really what you want to do is understand now when you read something, does that sound really slick and produced like it could be just cranked out of a machine? Or does that sound like somebody had to think about it and the way they put it sounds very human? Like we're going to start having to think about that because as an editor, you'll be asked to distinguish and say, what about this sounds like AI and what about this makes it more human? And so it's just something we're thinking about now that we weren't thinking about a year or two ago. And that's what I would say is really what's going on for me anyway.
Well, and I just recently edited a business book, and I do those on occasion. I do all kinds of I edit memoir and fiction and everything. But anyway, with business, it can, even before AI, it could feel a little slick or a little polished in a way that was lacking a certain depth. Not all business books, but some. So what I found was that relying more and more on examples, on real life scenarios, on personal from the writer, personal experience, et cetera, that really defines it, at least right now from AI. So that, and I find it more interesting anyway. So I think we'll see a move in that direction. I think we're seeing a move in that direction because if anyone has ever accidentally read an AI written book, which I did and didn't realize it, this was like 2 years ago, I was like, what is wrong with this book? Like they never give you an actual example. Like it's all like the top line of an outline, like of every paragraph, but with no real human
Yeah.
experiences.
There's no there in some
No,
ways.
there. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, this is an AI written book. I fell for it. So anyway.
Mhm.
Yeah, and this relates very much for me to the question of style and the challenges, because the more AI is adopted at an earlier age, for example. So imagine you're someone who's graduating high school at this point, and you've decided that you're going to use AI throughout your entire college education. You're going to read less, you're going to write less, you're going to have really no historical sense of human writing style. And when we say human writing style, this is a very wide range of styles, right? That humans have written in very different ways, all the way going back to the ancient Greeks, right? Um, but if you're not familiar with these kinds of styles, then you're less dexterous as a writer. You can respond to your audience with less facility. You can you can't really generate your own unique authorial sorry,
Authorial.
authorial voice. Thank you. Because you're using AI in order to fill in the blanks for you. And in order to really learn how to write, it's learning how to write badly and then rewriting it better and better each time. But AI skips that step for you. AI will generate the outlines for you. It will fill in the outlines to generate the full manuscript. And there is very little of the human in this, which is why you have very little of the sort of feet on the ground examples, as David and Ingrid were talking about.
That brings us to our final bullet point here for our topics. And thank you all for making the strong case for the need for the human in all of this. Um, any thoughts on the future of writing, editing, and publishing that we haven't covered yet before we shift to some of our questions?
I'll let it go to questions, but I'll defer to Ingrid and Matt if they have any final visionary thoughts for us on what the future is going to bring.
Ingrid, would you like to go?
I mean, like I said, I really think for editors, we're going to be doing a lot of humanizing of AI. Fact checkers are going to do a lot of old-fashioned fact checking. I think that yeah, I can't tell you how I think that we're ever going to now solve this whole issue of copyright and plagiarism and AI and all these books kind of released into the world. I'm not sure I know, except for we're going to become very discriminating readers and buyers of books, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah, I agree. There's already there are ways that the industry is responding to this, such as the Authors Guild that Ingrid mentioned earlier. They've developed their human authored certification, in a sense, organic writing. So you can buy the book and it'll have a stamp on it that says this was written by a human. I think more of that trend to separate the AI written products from the human written products is going to continue and even have a kind of cultural following for it. That's what I'm seeing or imagining. But like Ingrid and David, I'm sure are experiencing right now, a lot of us are essentially riding the tiger. We don't know, or we don't know what's going to happen. We're trying to slowly adopt it as professionals without overstepping any kind of ethical boundaries. But this is very much being resolved in the courts, and the courts move slowly. So really, the future is a bit ambiguous for me.
We'll switch here to Q&A. So thank you to Ingrid, Matt, and David for sharing some of your insights and experiences with us. Again, as I noted, AI is clearly creating opportunities and challenges, right, across writing, editing, and publishing. And it's clear that human expertise is going to continue to play a critical role in how these tools are used effectively. I think in stating that, I wanted to sort of address the question I see here on AI, how it keeps evolving and how it will soon sound human. And then one of our participants asking if we agree. So I think it just makes a stronger case for the need of a human.
One question that came up that I
Mhm.
actually said, good question, I will try to answer this live, was how are you discussing this with writers when what you were seeing from them is too heavily AI written, incoherent, illogical, etc.? This is a really interesting question because this has happened to me, and an author is turning in, or a freelance writer is turning in a piece that I think is way too heavily AI. We need to sort of work with them and push back and explain why this is not what we want, because they'll be like, hey, you told us to use AI. So you have to sort of flag it and say, this is the kind of thing that's okay, this is not. And everybody's going to be a little different, but there's just certain formulaic stuff that once you see that over and over again, you need to have a conversation with that writer. And then, hopefully they're not defensive about it. They're like, okay, I see now what you're saying, and they'll be willing to revise it. But that's, it's a tough conversation to have sometimes, I think.
Yeah, it's something that I try to broach before taking on a contract with the writer. So this is a question that has become a kind of a filter for the projects that I will take on. Not to say that I would reject out of hand any book that has had AI assistance, but I would be less, I guess, motivated to take it on.
So I saw the one of the first questions, which is good. Like, well, if it's AI generated, or you have to do so much work on the manuscript to make it not sound, why would you accept it in the first place as a publisher? Which is a great question. And I'm going to just blow everybody's mind here, or just maybe like the behind the curtain in publishing. There's always been a lot of editorial work that can be done on a manuscript. The authors come to all publishers with either kind of, in publishing, we'll say it's a great written, like the book is beautifully written, but it has no angle or hook. So then how does the reader get it? So the editor works on that front, right? With helping the writer develop the angle, the hook, etc. Or a book comes to us with a writer who has an amazing platform, great ideas, but can't write their way out of a paper bag. So what do we do with that? Well, if we like it enough and we think it will reach its audience and be able to get great ideas out into the world, then we will work as editors to make that manuscript really sing. That's what we do. And I think people are always kind of shocked. This is mostly, I'm talking nonfiction here, but this is, kind of one of those secrets of publishing, is that we do a lot of work, and this is way before AI, with writers. Some writers come with the whole package, and that's just a dream come true, right? But generally, it's one or the other. So now we're just contending with a new player in the game, and that's our friends at, our friend Claude or ChatGPT, who are, now we're kind of figuring that situation out. So it's not too different, if that makes sense, but it's a great question.
It really generates a new profile for the kind of writers that you work with. Even though you might be familiar with how to handle it, it's certainly a different kind of writer.
There, there is a question in here that I think would be good to address. It says, after using AI, how would you make sure it's providing correct information? For example, Matthew gave an example of using AI to learn about story or background settings in a manuscript. How do you make sure that AI's answer is correct without checking manually yourself, which would just be then you doing the work yourself? Does experience help here in that kind of just knowing what's good and bad? So I will quickly say that that is a really important issue, because we're having AI write a draft about technical subjects And, in the past, it would be like, okay, maybe it's just making this up. So you need a certain level of fact checking, or in our case, you definitely read over the entire manuscript and you use your own knowledge to say, does this make sense to me? And if it's highly technical and you don't know, then you rely on your subject matter experts, you query it and you say, hey, is this correct? Because AI might be eliding some information or grabbing something that's wrong that they think is correct, but it's actually a similar technology. So that's where the human in the loop has to verify it. So we will read over and of course that sort of mentally fact check everything or actually ask our SMEs to make sure that this is all correct.
Yes, no part. Editors we are reading everything. I want everyone to know that. You can potentially use it as a tool to help you sort of pull things, like Matt was saying with setting, so that you can pull that later on. But you are reading very carefully and editing very carefully that entire manuscript. So we're not letting AI just do that work for us. You could never trust that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and to answer one of the questions from Amelia, how do I guarantee the author's privacy? Is basically based on the AI product, the AI creators, for example, Microsoft, providing guarantees that they're not using it as training data. Now, what do I know what's happening behind the scene? Well, in the same way that I use my credit card in other places, I don't know what's happening behind the scene, but I'm being told that it is part of their legal structure. So, and as for developing a personal relationship with the writer, that's something I do regardless of the writer. And the writers that come to me, they typically find me, or I meet them within the sort of the literary scene, so to speak, in Seattle. I prefer to work locally and regionally, so I will oftentimes meet my writers either in person or on a Zoom call like this. Developing a kind of rapport with someone actually results in developing a kind of trust between each other.
And I see another great question. I think it's a fascinating one that our other panelists might have some comments on. Do you think AI tech companies might at some point cooperate by making it easy to know whether text has been AI generated for publishers to know and editors? Very interesting question to me because I think that that sort of watermarking issue of, yes, this has been AI generated and it needs to be disclosed. I don't think there's been any decisions or the companies aren't exactly falling over themselves to make that technology omnipresent and default. It may be available, but I don't know that it's a default, which it should be in my thinking, but I'm curious what the other panelists think.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to create a watermark unless these companies are forced
Yeah.
to legally create one. They would lose a lot of their user base, so to speak.
All the
Eh,
students writing their
yes,
papers with ChatGPT are like, I can't let my teacher know. Yeah, it's
precisely. Yeah.
interesting. Right.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Ingrid.
No, I agree with what.
Oh, okay. Okay, so thank you everyone for your thoughtful questions and participating. I know we didn't get to all of them, but there was a lot of great stuff there. I will hold that and see how I can address those and share it out. If today's discussion sparked your interest and you'd like to continue building your skills in this area, please know that we do offer several courses and programs that can help you deepen your expertise. I'd like to take a moment just to highlight the few that these incredible instructors and professionals are a part of that I mentioned earlier. So many of the things we discussed today, such as how to use AI responsibly, evaluate outputs, improve productivity, maintain quality, these are explored in much greater depth in a new course that Matt has just finished development on that will launch this fall. It is called AI Essentials for Writers and Editors. If this presentation left you wanting to learn more, this course might be an excellent fit for you. Those that RSVP'd, you will get a copy of this very simplified deck, but it does have the links in it for you to go and learn more. And for that one, we do have an info session coming up on Monday. If you're interested in developing a broader skill set in professional editing, we do have the longstanding very well recognized amongst the profession editing certificate program. This program itself helps prepare editors for success across publishing, communications, technology, marketing, many types of careers, fields. Uh, and so in an era where AI can generate content, again, we're seeing here where strong human judgment, editorial judgment, and critical thinking are very valuable skills. So if this is something that appeals to you, you might want to consider checking out that certificate program. If your interests are more focused on books or manuscripts, you might want to consider our developmental editing course. It is 12 weeks in length. This was something that Matt developed about 3 years ago, and both Matt and Ingrid have taught it. It offers advanced training in working with authors and shaping content at that structural level. So again, another great example where human expertise really remains essential. And then the final one I wanted to highlight within our portfolio of writing and editing courses is our Business Writing Foundations course. I know many that might be attending today work outside, quote, a traditional publishing role, but if you want to write clearly, effectively, have strong communication in any workplace setting, and utilize AI tools, we do have this great 9-week long course that is being taught by Andy Tosh, who is an incredible technical writer and editor. It'll help you build those strong skills, regardless of your industry or profession. So with all that said, I really hope you'll stay connected with us, continue to explore these topics, join us again in the future as part of these Expert Insight series. I will find a way to get answers to questions that we weren't able to address out to folks. Thank you so much. Thank you to Matt, Ingrid, and David, as always, for being an incredible part of the team that I get to work with, for sharing your expertise, for encouraging curiosity, and for being a part of this evening. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah,
Thank you, everyone.
appreciate you all. Hope to see you soon.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
thank you,
everyone.
Stacy, Matt, Ingrid. Appreciate it.